Welcome everyone to the International Research Symposium on Talent Education. If we haven't met before, my name is Pat Dercoli. I'm one of the co-coordinators, and my sidekick is Kate Enerson, who's helped a great deal all over the years. Kate, if you'll just say hello so that people know who you are.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight if you're here in real time, or thank you for joining us after the fact if you're watching the recording. We're so pleased to come together in this digital space again.
Yes. We probably have about 1/4 of the people that have registered. So we may be small in real time, but there are a lot of people that have registered that aren't here on a Sunday evening. So just a little background about the Research Symposium. It was founded in 1990 by Marjorie Aber. This is our 16th symposium, and our goal has always been to bring a wide-ranging group of researchers, teachers, and members of a community that are interested in applying evidence-based research to the field of Suzuki teaching and learning. And so we try to bridge the disciplinary boundaries and to welcome contributors from a variety of backgrounds. Today we'll have the opportunity we have participants, I should say. Today we have participants from 8 different countries, from as far away as New Zealand and Australia and India, Spain, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and the US, and both sides of the coast. So we're very pleased to have everyone here with us today. We'll hear talks today, 3 talks on Wednesday, and then on Friday, Dr. Karen Hendricks will be speaking to us about exercising empathy, the Suzuki way, and she will be joining us from Bergen, Norway. So we'll be sure to tune in for that one as well. Okay, just a couple of announcements. We ask again that everyone stay muted, and questions. Each presenter will receive 25-minute slot. They can use that as they see fit. We maybe 15-20 minutes for the presentation and 5 to 10 minutes for question and answer. The questions you can type into the chat, and Kate will watch those and relay them to us. So without further announcements or using any more of Yoon's time, let me say welcome Yoon, and she is going to talk to us about parents as home DJs, effects of music listening on young children's psychological well-being.
Right. So thank you everyone for coming to my presentation. My name is Yoon Cho, and this work is a collaborative work with Laila Pujo-Rovira and Dr. Beatriz Larry. So these pictures are from year 2020. So what do you remember from that time? So that year was certainly, a unique and challenging year to most of us, right? And me personally, as a mother of 2 little kids and a full-time researcher at the time, it was one of the most challenging year ever in my life. So literally on one day in March 2020, I became stuck at home with these 2 little kids, and they were like 2 and 3-year-olds at the time, and not knowing, when we'll be able to go back to our normal life. So this is an emotion matrix with many adjectives for emotions and feelings. And here, let's see if I can take it. So I'd like to, yeah. So this x-axis indicates like positive versus negative mood. So positive here, negative this side. And then the y-axis indicates like active, aroused versus passive and calm. So activation mode. And, from the time that my kids woke up in the morning until they went to bed, they were literally everywhere on this metric. And spending 24/7 with them, these little ones' emotional well-being directly affected the entire family's well-being. And therefore, it was my ultimate goal to keep them happy and be in a good mood as much as possible. So if my kids were on this side, let me see if I can do, yeah. In this side, I wanted to keep them here as long as possible. And if my kids were on this side, and I wanted to help them to move to this side so they can stay happy. And I'm a music educator and researcher, so I wanted to use music as a means to help my little ones, regulate their mood better. So I have decided to be a DJ in my home. So what does a DJ do? So the important role of a DJ is the music selection, right? Like picking a music that is right for the moment. And also having a sense of when to play. So in this sense, the important role for me as a DJ in my home was to be well aware of my kids' mood. So I closely watched my kids' mood throughout the day. And whenever I felt a need to help them feel better, I picked some music that I thought would work well to the moment. And then I watched it on my kids' reaction. And I felt like it quite worked well. So I and my collaborator, Dr. Beatrice Larry, decided to study this with parents with young children like me. And it was a small exploratory study with 19 families with young children using an experience sampling method. So basically what we did was, we asked the parents to try out just what I did, being a home DJ. And the data suggested that music is an effective means to help young children feel less stressed and stay happier throughout their daily life. And this also, in turn, helped parents to reduce their burdens associated with parenting. So this pilot study was published in Frontiers in Psychology last year. However, the main limitation of this pilot study was its small sample size. So we decided to conduct a follow-up study with a larger sample just to further investigate the pilot study. And at this time, we partnered with an early childhood music program named Music Together. So Music Together is an internationally franchised early childhood music program that offers weekly music classes to young children and families. What is unique about them is that they have their own music repertoire that is used in their class. And they also highly encourage their participating families to sing and listen to those repertoire outside of the class too. So Music Together families are very familiar with their repertoire. And for this research, consistent with the pilot study, our population of interest was parents or primary caregivers of at least one child aged 0 to 5 living in the United States and Canada. And Music Together helped us recreate study participants using their email list from their current and former families. And through this channel, we were able to recreate a large number of participants. But I should make it clear that Music Together only assisted us with recruitment and never involved in any stage of study design, data collection, or analysis. So for this research, we curated 8 music playlists. And for this playlist, we particularly considered 5 factors. So the first one is enjoyment. So we chose music that could be enjoyed by not only young children, but also their other caregivers. And we selected music from a variety of musical genres and styles, and also from different parts of the world. So diversity was an important consideration. And we also tried to include more music that was not digitally processed. So, in other words, more acoustic music. We have music, some music that is digitally processed, but most of the musics are acoustic. And we ended up then having a total of 8 playlists. So 4 pairs in different colors. So blue, green, red, and yellow ones. And what this color indicates is that, so basically it's different levels of valence and energy. Okay, so valence means the like musical positiveness. So, just what we typically think of like happy versus sad music. So if it goes higher, it's like happier music. If it goes lower, then it's like kind of sadder music. And then if the energy level is about, the perceptual intensity. So if it goes higher, it's like energetic and like upbeat music. If it goes lower, it's kind of calming and like chilling kind of music. So each color playlist were, curated with different levels of balance and energy levels so that our participants can use different types of music in to their given context. Also, each color had two different playlists. So as you can see, we have like ones, or the yellow one, red one, like ones and twos. So ones are like exclusively selected by us. And for the twos, half of them were music together repertoire. And then the other half were selected by us. So we wanted to see if familiarity to the music has any role in their use of music. So we made the playlist in this way. So data collection was done in the fall last year. So we first had like about 2 weeks of sign up period. So Music Together sent out emails to the families, and anyone who are interested signed up to for the study participation. And we had like over 1,900 parents signed up for the study. So after the sign up period, we gave them the playlist and had them to freely explore the playlist for a week. And then in the second week of October, we ran an experiment week called Parents as a Home DJ Week. And during this week, parents were asked to be a home DJ for their children using the playlist that we provided. So as just as I did, they paid more attention to their children's mood, and when they saw an emotional need, they picked up a playlist that they thought may work well, and then they reported their child reaction to the music by filling out a daily survey every day. So they had to fill out a daily survey every day throughout the week. And the survey asked questions like in what situation did you play music, and what playlist did you select? Like how familiar your child was with the playlist, like how much did you your child like the playlist, and after you play the music, did you perceive any changes in your child emotionally or behaviorally, things like that. And then at the end of the week, they also filled out an exit survey. So 562 parents took part in the Parents as Home DJs week, and they were largely from like middle class population, so highly educated, and also like a white dominant population. This is just because this is the main population of Music Together. So it could be like the limitation of our study, but it's what it is. So we that's what we have got for the study. And data analysis was based on 2,256 reports provided these 562 families. And overall, music was used at different times and at different contexts throughout the day. So music was more frequently accompanied during like daily routine, like bedtime, bath time, meal time. Also, when their child were engaged in free play independently. And in terms of the playlist selection, overall, the blue ones were the most popular ones, and followed by green and yellow ones. And then we also had some participants chosen their own repertoire instead of the playlist, so which was totally fine. And in terms of familiarity, parents rated, how familiar their child would be with the playlist, and then as expected, all the twos were rated higher than ones. So the twos are the ones that has Music Together repertoire. So that totally makes sense. Mm-hmm. However, when we looked at how much that their kids were like the playlist, it was not necessary that twos were more preferred by, than the ones. So yeah, so that's it. And this is about when parents decided to put on music for their child. So remember the emotion metrics. So the x-axis is about pleasantness and y-axis is about activeness. So music was the most frequently used when the kids were like more pleasant and more active. So when kids were like happy and energetic, that was the time that parents mostly used music to accompany, but also in other situations too. But the least, the context that least choose music was used was when their kids were like less pleasant and less active. So, when they are tired and drowsy, things like that. And then we also asked them to report how much they felt music was helping to regulate their child's mood. And their perceived effects were greater when they used music to maintain their child's positive mood. So do you remember here, right? When the kids were happy and active, the effects were higher. And then the lowest effects were found when the kids was like lower in activeness and pleasantness. However, interestingly, music was also effective when the child was less present but active. So, when kids are like upset and, like really fussy kind of situations, music was still effective in regulating their children. So it's like, I guess it's like soothing effects of music. And so yeah, I will have to make, this research section simple because of the time limit, but this is one of the most interesting finding was actually found here. So we analyzed the data in those 4 different contexts separately. And what was consistently found was that no matter in what context the music was used, greater effects of music were reported if the music was something that was more familiar to the kids and also liked by their child. So in other words, although we initially anticipated that music would help regulate child mood better if the music played is more suitable to the given context in terms of its balance and energy levels of the music, right? However, what our data showed was, that more than those sonic characteristics of music, how much the child would actually like the music and was familiar with the music were way more powerful factors to determine if use of music can be successful in regulating children's mood. If you pay attention to this number though, so this is about familiarity and liking, and this is R² value. So just pay attention to these 2 numbers. This is for the familiarity and liking, same thing, familiarity, liking, again, same thing, and the last one. So even though familiarity appear to be a significant predictor of how the use of music could be successful or not, these R² actually are very different. And what this means is that liking much more than familiarity is like a very powerful factors to determine if the use of music can be successful in regulating children's mood or not. So familiarity is still a significant factor, but liking is much powerful than any other factors. So just to wrap up, yeah. So I'm stuck. Okay. So based on our data from 576 participants, we are overall confident to say that music is an effective means to help young children stay happier and be in a better mood. But we know that just merely playing music does not help a lot. So it's important to consider several factors when utilizing music to fulfill emotional needs in young children. So first, our data showed that music effectively maintained children's like positive mood, right? When they are on this side, if they play the music, they stayed happy and active like longer. And also when the kids were like not really present, but they are still, active in energy level, the music was still helpful to regulate their unpleasantness to better, right? However, when kids were like low in active level and pleasantness is not so sure. So what it says to us is children's mood is an important cue to determine when to use music. And familiarity and liking appear to be the significant predictors of the effects of music in regulating children's mood. And particularly, how much children like music emerged as a powerful predictor. However, one thing that I should clearly mention is that our playlist did not include music, that is known to be like super liked by kids, like Baby Shark or, like Cocomelon, we don't have those musics. So it's still unclear if we have those kind of music, if the same level of positive effects will be found or not. So that's our next step that we will have to investigate. But still, like children's liking is a very important factor when we, play music to help children to feel better. And data analysis is still in progress because we have other data from sign-up survey and exit survey. So we'll have to include more factors such as like child temperament, child age, family environment, and so on. So right now we only have this much, but more complete findings will be presented at upcoming conferences such as ISME, SMPC, and NAFME this summer and fall. And if you're interested to learn about our study more, you can visit our study Instagram page here. So you can access to the playlist that we created, and you can see how the study was done. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Yoon. That was wonderful. So many times I've had parents say to me, I can tell if I play the public radio station and they have music on, when the kids are in the back seat, they're much more well behaved than if
Yeah.
I have the news on or a rock station. So it's interesting to hear that your research. Does anyone have any questions? If you want to type your questions in the chat for Yoon.
Well, people are typing. I had a question for Yoon, if I may. I was curious, you said that familiarity seemed to be the most powerful predictor of, liking was the most powerful predictor of mood regulation. Are some of the analyses that you're working on now about exploring some of the individual differences? Like, are you going to consider things like the age of the children, or do you have some insights you could share about that?
Yeah, so the missing part here is that we don't have individual factors considered in this analysis. So we have some of the factors that we are considering is child temperament. This is a big thing that we are considering, but we haven't been able to include it here yet. So child temperament, age, and family environment, like, background of the parents and so on. So yeah, those will be included, and yeah, I'm curious if the same findings will remain or things will be changing. So yeah.
Thank you. I see Tim has put a question in the chat. Hi, Tim. Good to see you again. How did you determine the valence of the songs in the playlist?
Oh, yes, I should have mentioned that. So we used the Spotify API for the analysis of the song. So yeah, they provide different factors of music, like including valence, energy, danceability, acousticness, and so on. So we only but included valence and energy level.
Danceability, did you say?
Yes. And interestingly, energy level and danceability are not going together all the time. So we think like, energy level is higher, it's kind of more danceable, but it's not it's just from my experiences.
If I had to guess, it might be related to beat salience, like the timing of the underlying beat. But and any other questions for Dr. Cho?
It looks like Lisa has a question, but it just went a direct message to me instead of everyone, probably because I'm a co-host, so I can share my screen.
Oh,
but-
well. Un, did participants across all ages use technology while listening to music during phase 1 of your study?
What technology?
Do you know what they were doing while they were listening to music? Or were they listening to music only?
So, what we ask the parents to do is rather than to directly use music to do something, we, just use the music as a background.
Okay.
But we have a lot of response. Actually, the biggest responses in terms of the behavior of the children is responding to music. So whatever they were doing before, after music, they were kind of responding to the music in different ways, dance or clapping, singing or humming, whatever. So yeah, so even kids are really feeling bad and, tired. Still, a lot of kids are doing that. So.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Wow, cool. Yeah, it's great. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, we have someone else coming in the room. Okay, then I think we can go. Thank you so much, Yoon. That was wonderful. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
And we will hear Caitlin Smith. And Caitlin is going to speak to us about new directions for note reading within the Suzuki method using eye movement research. So take it away, Caitlin.
Okay, let me just get my screen share up here. Okay, so I'm Caitlin Smith. My paper is titled New Directions for Note Reading Within the Suzuki Method Using Eye Movement Research. So the Suzuki method of teaching musical instruments to children emerged in post-World War II Japan. Suzuki was an amateur violinist turned professional music educator who based his method on the idea that all Japanese children learn to speak Japanese with little difficulty. He called his system the mother tongue approach. Key principles to teaching a child a musical instrument via the Suzuki method include starting very young and daily listening for multiple hours to the core repertoire. Reading notes on a page is delayed until the child can play in tune with beautiful tone. Then, as the child matures, both in terms of technical ability and age, a Suzuki teacher adds in note reading. The Suzuki method is one of the world's most widely used music pedagogies. It has produced countless accomplished musicians, but it sometimes produces musicians whose ability to learn by ear and memorize far outstrips their sight reading and note reading abilities. In fact, this inconsistency in musical ability is one of the most common stereotypes of and objections to the Suzuki method. In this presentation, I will explore how we can close this gap between teaching how to play by ear and to read notes within the Suzuki method by using the evolving research on music and eye tracking movement. My interest in this topic started because I came across an article about helping college-bound kids do better on their SATs and ACTs in the reading section. And so this article I was reading was talking about sometimes when these teenagers are reading too slowly, they don't get through all the reading material in time to give the questions all their attention at the end for comprehension. They're focusing their eyes on just individual letters of the word or even individual words at a time instead of looking at the greater conglomeration of words. So for example, that would mean like if we treat the eye as a camera, these students were zooming in so far that they were just getting little tiny snapshots of this huge picture. And to help them read faster, what they can do is zoom out. So instead of looking at individual letters, try to take in multiple words at a time or entire phrases or, a whole half a line at a time so that the fixation of their eyes didn't have to go so slowly, but then it could take in more at once. And then they would have more time to answer the questions, hopefully correctly. So I got interested in that article I read and kind of wondered if something similar has been researched in the music world. And yes, it has. Most of my ideas here I'm taking from this talk called Early Attraction in Temporally Controlled Sight Reading of Music. This was a watershed study in 2018, so pretty recent. It was done by 3 Scandinavian musician researchers, and they drew on the previous research that had been done in this area and found gaps in the knowledge, and then found ways to look ahead and continue this research. So before I go into too much more detail about this 2018 study, I want to talk about how I'm using these terms sight reading and note reading. So I define sight reading as playing something at first sight, and then note reading as playing something at first sight, but then going back and practicing it repeatedly throughout the week in between lessons. And a problem that I think other Suzuki teachers probably encounter, not just me, is that our Suzuki students, because we put so much emphasis on learning by ear, our students can often memorize and repeat whatever they read at first sight. So it's really only the first pass that they're actually reading. And then sometimes when they go back to practice their note reading, they're playing from memory, maybe just looking at the page, but not really taking in what's on the page. So that means, unfortunately, that they're probably practicing mistakes if they don't get the sight reading exactly correct the first time. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm really just talking about sight reading, but in the Suzuki world, sight reading, of course, informs note reading. So in this paper and in my presentation, I want to touch on a few of these current research topics on music and eye tracking movement. So I'm going to talk about differences between language and music, the early attraction hypothesis, the distant attraction hypothesis, and then methods of measuring sight reading, including eye hand span and eye time span. And then I want to apply these to the Suzuki method. So first, let's talk about differences between language and music. Some things are not analogous in reading music versus reading words. So for example, music doesn't have words or groupings that are always the same. We do have idioms and gestures. For example, one thing I thought of is if you see 2 notes that are the same but an octave apart, if you have the top note first and then the bottom octave after, most of the time it's going to be something like more or less, and that's the gesture. And we just kind of recognize that it's an idiom, it's a gesture, but that's not the same as a word. Like in English, you could have the word and, it's always spelled and, it's always a conjunction, but we don't have that in music. Music just doesn't have that exact same thing. So that's an important difference between language and music. Another difference is that in reading words, we can take time to contemplate, process, and digest information. But in reading music, we are bound by metrics or timing. So in other words, we can't stop to think and process and digest. Music is time bound. So in applying these ideas to the Suzuki method is based on the idea that music is a language, but the truth is much more nuanced than that. Recognizing the differences between language and music helps us prepare our students to read music more efficiently and accurately. So now let's talk about the early attraction hypothesis. This is a hypothesis that the researchers of the 2018 study were operating under. And early attraction means looking ahead to complex points in the music. So when readers see difficulties in the musical score, they attract their first fixations earlier in the course of the musical performance, which helps these readers allocate enough of their very limited processing time to the difficulties. These difficulties or unexpected notes in the score become a magnet to the eye. The eye is drawn towards the difficulty. And let me show you an example of this. So these 4 lines are labeled T1, T2, T3, T4, and these are snapshots of moments in time. And the difficulty is this A flat here. It's a difficulty for 2 reasons. The first reason is that the previous notes are all scalar, just moving stepwise, and then we have a larger interval just kind of surprising us out of nowhere. And the other reason it's a difficulty that draws the eye towards it is because there's that accidental. We see the flat ahead of time, and that just acts as a magnet for our eye. It draws us there. So there are a few symbols on this page. The vertical gray lines, the cursors, think of that as like a blinking cursor on a computer or something like that. that shows metrical time as time is passing. And then the gray circles on the screen show the reader's fixation, or in other words, where the sight reader is actually looking, where their eyes are. So you can see there are a few ways that we can handle encountering a difficulty. One way is we can terminate a prior fixation earlier than otherwise, meaning don't spend as much time on the easier previous notes. And then the other way that you can see in between the third line and the fourth line is we can skip some fixations. So the note right before the difficulty, right before that A flat in T4, the B natural doesn't ever get the gray circle over it. The I is just skipping directly from the C ahead to the A flat. So that's another way we can handle it when we come across this early attraction. Another hypothesis the authors of the 2018 study were operating under is called the distant attraction hypothesis. And distant attraction means that saccades landing on difficult symbols might be longer than average. Or in other words, we spend more time looking at something hard ahead of time than at something easy ahead of time. This does not happen in reading language, but it does happen in reading music. So again, this is another interesting difference between language and music that I think can inform our understanding of the Suzuki method. And also applying this distant attraction hypothesis to the Suzuki method, we can teach our students how to identify what a difficult target is for them based on their level. Some things might look really scary, but are actually fairly easy to play. For example, like if our students see a G double sharp, they might panic, but we can help them learn that that's actually just an A. Then on the other hand, some things might look deceptively easy to play, but then actually are fairly difficult. So we can teach our students how to do a quick scan before starting to play to try to find these difficult targets. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning is that what different Suzuki students will consider a difficult target could vary widely among students, even two students working on the exact same piece at similar levels. One thing might be easy for one student and difficult for another. So we can take those ideas to help our students at whatever level they're at. So these researchers of the 2018 study did experiments to measure sight reading. They had sight readers come into the lab, and the sight readers were both amateurs and professionals. And the researchers, one researcher or author would sit with one sight reader at a time, and the researchers would track eye movement using technology. And then later the researchers went on to analyze what they saw using 3 different ways of measuring. So these sight readers would sit at a keyboard, and the researchers have technology where they can track exactly where the eye is looking. And then at the same time, they can see exactly what note and what beat the hands were playing at. So that's how they gather their data. And then these authors had 3 different methods of measuring their data. So first of all, the first method was measuring in spatial units. An example of this would be measuring in inches or centimeters or something even smaller than that. And this was not an effective measurement. And the reason is that lengths of bars can vary widely. So it just tends not to be super accurate. If you think about a bar that has a ton of 16th notes in it, and then compare that to a bar that has just one whole note, those are not going to be the same measurement in terms of spatial units. So this is not a very effective method they did not use to look at their data in the end. A second method that they considered was measuring in absolute time. So example of this would be measuring in seconds, where the hand is versus where the eye is in terms of seconds. And this already has a term. This is called the eye-hand span, and it's the distance between production and perception. Or in other words, it refers to the difference between where the eye is looking and what the hand is playing. And traditionally, in past studies before this 2018 study, this is what almost all the researchers used to interpret, to gather and interpret their data, was using absolute time. And some previous studies found something that I found so fascinating. They found that for amateur and professional musicians, 1 second was how far ahead their eyes were of their hands for students, non-professional musicians and professional musicians. We might think, I kind of had the idea that maybe professional musicians would be their eyes would be several seconds ahead, but that just wasn't the case. For varying abilities of players, it was 1 second for each. So this tells us that even experienced sight readers do not use bands as long as a lot of people had previously believed. And then this also tells us that a steady tempo is essential for successful sight reading, and staying steady lets our eyes look ahead and stay ahead while the hands play. And then the third is the one that the researchers ended up using the most. And this is one of the most interesting parts of the study to me. The third method was measuring in metrical time. So an example of this would be measuring in beats. And this was original to this paper, that they came up with this new way of measuring. And they called this the eye time span. And this contrasts to method 2, which was the eye hand span. So the eye time span is different from what we had seen before. The results of their experiments show that expert music readers may indeed look further ahead in their music than less proficient individuals. So they tracked with the eye time span how many beats ahead the sight readers were, how many beats ahead their eyes were of their hands, not how many seconds or how many inches or centimeters or whatnot. And they found that this was the most effective way to look at the data they had collected. And in applying this to the Suzuki method, we need to practice looking ahead in the music with respect to the tempo, not with respect to a certain distance on the page in inches or a certain number of seconds, because those things just aren't statistically significant. Some ideas for application for Suzuki teachers that I had, the difference in the eye time span, that third method of measuring, in amateurs versus professionals was significant. So with the second method of measuring, the eye hand span, there was not a statistically significant difference between amateurs versus professionals. You'll remember it's just about 1 second for each of them. But when the researchers look at the eye time span, it was different. So we also discovered from this paper that when tempo increases, this eye time span also tends to increase. So in applying this towards the Suzuki method, we can teach our students to allocate more of their time resources for symbol decoding and motor planning, especially when they're at faster tempos. So it becomes even more important for our students, the faster the music they're reading is, the more they need to propel themselves to look ahead and create a time buffer. Another thing that the researchers of this study discovered, which is something that I think we all kind of have a hunch about, but they actually were able to use data to show that this is true, that amateur musicians tend to rush toward the difficulty. So my idea to apply this to the Suzuki method is, of course, we need to teach our students to remain steady when anticipating difficulties, even when the eye is drawn like a magnet towards something difficult in the score. We still need to help them rein in the tempo. So I think what I would like to do is teach my students to practice their sight reading with a metronome, which is something that I have not done a lot of, but I think knowing this new research would be really beneficial for students trying to improve their sight reading. And another new research finding from this 2018 paper that I think really applies to the Suzuki method is, it's another thing that we all probably could have guessed, but they were actually able to show that this was statistically, in terms of research, true. So they discovered that it's harder to sight read skips than it is to sight read steps. So in applying this to the Suzuki method, we need to give special attention to teaching, learning, and reading these larger intervals, and maybe even less attention on stepwise reading. And I'm thinking this would be maybe a bit more important early on, even at the beginning of reading, to not delay teaching how to read these giant intervals, these big steps for our students as we introduce note reading. A few more ideas for application for Suzuki teachers. Once we can teach our students to train their eyes to stay a few beats ahead, as many beats ahead as they can as they sight read, will help our students create a buffer in time. And they can use this time buffer, of course, for things like, turning the page in orchestra, following ensemble leader cues, so not just being buried in the music. And this could be with a conductor in an orchestra, or even it could be, my Suzuki students following me in a group lesson setting. Even when they're still fairly new sight readers, they can still get in that habit of looking up and following cues. But then I think most importantly, the way that we can help our students become better musicians and better sight readers is once they create this time buffer to help them interpret the written expressive markings. Because I think sometimes those are one of the first things to fall by the wayside when we're just trying to grab those notes. So in applying this to the Suzuki method, I mentioned earlier in my introduction that lackluster expressive playing is a common criticism of the Suzuki method. But if we can help our students create more of a time buffer that they can then use when they sight read to interpret the music beautifully and grab those written expressive markings, that opens up a lot more possibilities for them to create beautiful music and for us to help them develop their beautiful hearts. And some conclusions I'd like to draw from looking into this study through the lens of a Suzuki violin teacher is I would like to make some adjustments to how I teach sight reading to my Suzuki students. One big takeaway that I have from this research is that there are methodical and measurable processes and ways to improve for myself, of course, but also to teach my students. I think a lot of students, and maybe some of us, felt this way when we were still relatively new to the world of sight reading, that it's kind of like a boogeyman, and either you're good at it or you're not. But the reality is that this study showed is that there are a lot of ways that we can improve and train the eye to move forward in terms of beat. And I would like to teach with more focus on this forward reading in terms of musical time and beats, and help my students know that they need to be thinking in terms of this musical measurement beats rather than 1 second ahead or 1 inch ahead, something like that. And as the Suzuki method is now used worldwide, I think this presentation's evaluation of these suggested future endeavors has vast potential interest and practical significance. So thank you.
So feel free to put your questions in the chats, everyone. Caitlin, you did have one question come in while you were speaking from Angela, who's asked if you could please share the citation for that finished study.
Oh, yeah.
On your last slide, but if you can
Yeah.
pop it in so people
Yeah,
can.
I'd be happy to. Let me just pull it up here. Maybe if you're interested in it, you can screenshot it and get all the details here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So perhaps while people are typing, I also had a question I wanted to ask you, Caitlin, moderator privilege. Can you tell me a bit about, I'm not familiar with this paper. Did they use just sort of these single melodic lines? Were there more complex sequences or phrases or harmonies? What were the stimuli like?
So that's something they did mention in the paper, that was something that could have, had so many variations, and they just had to choose something and kind of hone in on it just for the sake of simplicity. So they weren't having, people like sight read whole symphony parts. It was pretty straightforward melodic lines, but they did give different options for the amateurs versus the professional musicians to try the like easier lines versus the hardest lines. And then they took that information and we're able to look at that. But I think that is something that would definitely interest me for future research, to see like, what if they did have someone sight read a, I don't know, like Prokofiev symphony or, something like that. How much of those could they still keep the time and look ahead and get, all these difficulties, because there are lots of things in more complex music that could act as magnets towards the eyes. But just for this study, it was just pretty straightforward melodies.
That's helpful, thank you. And the reason I ask is there's some literature about expertise in processing, and you made me think of it with your opening statement about SATs, where people would read whole words or abstract sentences as opposed to letters.
Right.
And expert musicians will read, for example, if they've got a bunch of arpeggiating notes, they don't see 8 different notes. They see one cluster
Exactly.
of arpeggiating notes in a key.
Right.
I was curious about complexity because an expert's eye reads those 8 notes as a unit rather than, 8 sequences in time. But that's
Right. So they could think like, oh, I have a D major arpeggio in 3 octaves coming up, and then I'm going to do, yeah, they would see that a lot differently versus an amateur student who would be like, okay, D and then an F sharp. And then
right.
Yeah. They might just be still decoding like ledger lines or something. That would be the difficulty that drew their eye versus what would draw the eye of a professional musician. Yeah, that would be very interesting to look more into.
Fascinating, thank you. And I see, Pat, you've added a question. Caitlin, have you developed any strategies you could share for how you might develop this time buffer with your students?
This is something, I might have to give this some time for me to like give my students some time to work on this with me and then maybe report back in a future conference or something. But no, not really. And I do think this is a hard thing for the younger kids to understand, to be like, your eyes have to, be trained 1 beat ahead or be trained 2 beats ahead. Although something I've been trying to work on with myself before I, put my students through this is I've been working on some sight reading for myself and like setting the goal of in every bar, I'm going to keep always my eye 1 beat ahead and just see how I can do it, and try that also with the metronome. And then I'm not going back and practicing that line. Like that's the issue with these Suzuki trained ears I mentioned earlier, is that, it's only sight reading the first time. You can't go back and practice the same sight reading line and get the exact same, benefit. But then my goal for myself is I want to see how many beats ahead I can train my eye to stay. That's something that I didn't see mentioned in the research paper, like what the consensus was with professional musicians. Like, it did say that amateurs and professional musicians stayed 1 second ahead, but depending on what tempo and, what piece it is or whatnot, that could mean a whole bar, or maybe it could mean 1 beat. I don't know. So the long answer is all of that. The short answer is not yet. I will let you know when I come up with some ideas if they work.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question from Yoon, who says, thank you for introducing this study. She knows you're a Suzuki violin teacher and wonders what in particular made you interested in this particular study, or if you were planning to do a study of your own.
Right. Okay. Well, so I love to read, and I do a lot of reading because I have a fussy 1-year-old. And I do most of my reading in the middle of the night with him, when he's sick or upset or whatever. Like about a week ago, I read 3 books in one night. And when I first had him and he had colic and he would just scream through the night, and he's teething now. Anyway, just all the stuff that come with having babies and toddlers and kids. I just thought, well, this is great. The bright side is that I will be doing a lot of reading. And then I also got into audiobooks, and I realized that you can like speed it up. Like you can listen 2 times as fast and 3 times as fast. So that like kind of got my brain thinking. So at first, when I would listen to audiobooks, I couldn't understand it if I went any faster than one at the original speed. And then the more, nights I was up and bored and had my headphones in, I realized I could make it to 2 times the speed, and then I could make it to 3 times the speed. So then I started looking into how could I actually do this reading like on my Kindle or phone or whatever. And I came across this idea of helping the teenage students with their SATs and ACTs. So I don't currently have plans to do like an official study. I'm a part-time stay-at-home mom and part-time Suzuki teacher. I would love to, have the resources and stuff to conduct a full study. I need to look into exactly what that would entail. So, I could maybe take some expertise from the people in the group here to tell me how to get that going, but that would be very interesting.
Excellent, thank you, Caitlin. And Tim says, what would happen if we made students sight read 12-tone rows? You could give it a try and report back, Tim. For the sake of time, we have to move forward. So Pat, I'll hand it back to you. Oh. Oh, so Pat, I just remuted you. I'm sorry. I was trying to be helpful.
There we go. All right, we have our Zoom controls under control. Thanks, Caitlin. And now we're going to hear from Lisa Crawford. And Lisa is going to talk to us about beginning with composing, commitment to process over outcome. So, Lisa, it's all yours.
Thank you. And you know what? It is so lovely to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation. And I want to tell you that everything about my world musically is composing with children. Beginning with composing, commitment, process over outcome. Let's think about definitions first, so that each of us is thinking about process in the way that I do. A series of actions, motions, or operations leading to some result. So if I give you a composition project, I'm going to be more focused on your expansion and extension than the outcome as being something remarkable or something that is marketable. Not interested in some of those things. Process, in my way of looking at children, is all about, I'm so sorry, your faces are covering, there we go. My process is all about, hello.
So we
Hold
can,
on. There we go. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we can hear you fine, but your slideshow is not keeping up with what you're saying.
Okay, are we on process, the process page?
No, you're still on your title slide.
Is
If
that
you go
right?
to the top left, click where it
Yes.
says play from start, and then it'll just go in the slideshow view, because right now it's just in the edit view. I almost did the same thing.
Okay, I'll do it all over again. And what do you see now?
We still see your slideshow. So we still see your opening slide. If you go up to the top corner of your
Yes.
slideshow and
Yeah.
say play from the start, then and click on that, then it'll move. There you go. Way up on your toolbar there. There's it. There you go.
What do you see?
Where it hasn't changed.
Uh-huh. Okay,
There, now if you click on play from the start.
yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
It would also work to just manually use the arrow keys and move the slides forward. Like slide 1 is highlighted in red now. If you click on slide 2, we'll all be able to see it.
You can see application of definitions.
Can you click your cursor on the second slide in the sidebar?
I did that. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Now we see it.
Okay, so I'm just not going to play from start, do that. We'll
Yeah.
just see it this way. Is that all right with you?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, take it away.
Thank you. So the process for the student is all the things that make you available as a learner for understanding the inspiration you find to create and compose. That's all I care about. In comparison to product for the student, we all know what's going to happen when that darker blue ball hits the lighter blue balls. And I want kids to go beyond the foundation of a project's instructions. expand, extend, develop beyond what I've requested as the foundation of a project. I just want you to know about that before we get going with process. I think it's developed by information, experience, opportunities to compose, or projects that develop many aspects of a young human's creativity. Here's an example of early in my composition teaching that really stuck with me. So I'm sharing it with you. I was helping a teacher with a little brother, 4 years old. She was giving a Suzuki violin lesson. So I asked him if he would like to color with me. And I started drawing a picture here in the blue side. And he said, yes, he would. He drew the left side. And if you notice, he did a flag at the top and a squiggly line outside of his drawing. And I felt that that was significant. And it truly has, I'm so glad that I kept that drawing, because that's what I'm looking for with kids. No matter their instrument, how are they extending and expanding a project that I give them? For my dissertation, I want to share that there are many different kinds of young composers. There are many different things that add to that, I don't know, that inspiration. Some kids have little or no composing interest. Some children may enjoy composing projects, but they exhibit no further inclination to compose. Some children possess a natural ability to compose. Some exhibit an ability to compose after being invited, but not before. And a more recent one that I've added is composes with greater interest, where there was none prior, when a student finds a particular instrument, acoustic or technology, by the way, appealing. All right, here's the fun part. Age 7, one of my earliest composition students in the late 80s, late 80s, and I'm so sorry, late 90s, and first snowfall, age 7. I love this piece. If we had a lot of time, I would play them all for you. Age 14. You notice that there are similarities. Every kid does everything differently, and I think that this is what I talk with teachers about most frequently. Adam was 8 when I started working with him. Amazing kid. Doesn't do music as an adult, which I went and found him, and was very surprised to learn that. In classrooms, I offer many opportunities for children to write music with me. And, you know, once upon a time, there was a big blue ghost. I didn't write those words, count on that. And they also came up with melody. Sounds a little bit familiar, but I loved it. And we sang it a lot more than Halloween. So I was invited when I was at University of Oregon to teach composition and theory to students in the Suzuki program. And my daughter was taking Suzuki piano. And I was teaching in a summer program, really extraordinary program. Some of you may have heard of it. And students worked with private teachers all year long and were invited back each summer. And you could do music and theory with me and then perform your completed projects, which was probably the change one of the biggest change points in my life as an educator. Here you go, piano quartet in D minor. Nothing like Suzuki student titles. They did it as a group project. I've never seen such extraordinary behavior and conduct. I've never seen such shock and amazement from parents in my entire life. It was a phenomenon, really something else. And here we have another one. If you notice the title, String Trio in D major. I have a lot of D keys. Etude in G major. Short but beautiful. And when I'm in composing with groups discussion, I like to highlight that the interaction of students is one of my, I love that. When it's good, and it really helps to support a project. Communication, extremely important. Leadership and innovation demonstrated is also extraordinary. Creative process, really expanding and extending that is remarkable. And project completion is always of great importance to me. My studies have to do with many of the research that has already been conducted by these individuals throughout certainly the second half of the 20th century and into our 21st century. So I would like to hear about your experiences, your interests in composition, what you have done, and what you have especially learned about your students in your Suzuki teaching. Or you can ask anything you want.
We did have one question in the chat, Lisa. Angela asks, how old were the young composers in the summer program at U Oregon?
Yeah, so wait for it. Oh, like 7, 8. They'd already had 3 years on their instruments, and they composed together in groups, sitting on the floor. It was one of the most fantastic things that I've ever seen. And you know, it happened every year after that, but those were the compositions from my first year with them, and I have never forgotten it. And I know that, and I'm almost positive that it is because of how Suzuki students begin by ear.
That's so
Because
impressive.
you already know to count on your ears. There's a lot to that.
May I ask a follow-up to
Oh, yes.
question about the summer students? And how were they instructed to notate what they composed? Or did they do it themselves?
Okay,
or
so
did they
they did that all. I still have their original scores, and I did notate that for them, but they all notated their own parts. They already were able to do that, and they were all third years. I know, remarkable, right? I'm not crazy, am I? I thought it was remarkable what I was observing.
The reading book that I use has some opportunities for composition, and what always surprises me is they're given a question, musical question, and they have to supply the answer. And I would say that 8 out of 10 times, without a lot of instruction from me, the kids end on the keynote. They use some of the rhythm from the question, and it's amazing. But I do agree with you. It's all because of the listening and the ear development we've done ahead of time.
Yeah, I love that example. Thank you.
So I have a question to you, Lisa. So just for you personally, how important is notation, like reading music, writing, being able to notate music? So from your, composition perspective.
I think notation is a part of learning music, but I use, I do a lot of technology. So by the time my students in high school are being assigned to do an album project, I ask them to notate what they're doing. And yet I don't think I have a strong opinion about people avoiding notation. With my early students, it's all ear, it's all by ear. I got that message strongly from Suzuki, the Suzuki work I did. It still holds for me. But I like for kids to learn notation. And I also like for students to build ears. I'm an ear builder. So that's how I begin in choral activities, choral arts. It's all listening and echoing back and then moving from there forward from there. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm really curious about your work with young students in composition, and I wanted to know, especially because you're just working with ear, not with the notation. What is your process for working with the young ones, getting them to be creative and to compose? How do you do that?
Let me pull something out of my file for you, because I don't want you to ever forget this. So I'm writing a book called Beginning with Composition, because I would like to think that everything we do is composition related. And having said that, it's not, can you see that?
Yes.
I call it a box comp. Every kid does these. I start with one line for K1, pre-K, and then everybody can do it. One sound per box. And then, by the time you are up to 4 parts, maybe 4 sections, and put them all together. Angela used that. You can design all kinds of ways to use those. And you can do 2 groups of 4 at a time, or 20 groups of 4 beats at a time. Anyway, everybody can do them, no matter your size, age, or experience.
I'd love to read your manuscript when it's done. So I'm so curious about what kinds of notation you use in that rudimentary form.
Yeah, so you know what my line is? You can use any symbol you would like. However, you are communicating to somebody else to play your composition. So how are you going to create a symbol that others will know what it means? Will you develop a key? Will you, that's a whole other side of that, where keeping it simple is important in the beginning. Sometimes body sounds, clapping, hitting our head, whatever. All of those can be used before any instruments are ever even thought about.
Lisa, I'm mindful that people are in different time zones. I don't know if it's early or late for some folks who might not be able to unmute and ask questions. Perhaps we'll make sure that you get through the rest of your slides and then people can type as you're talking if they need.
Slides are finished. I am finished except for questions.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Well, Pat, I think that puts us right on schedule because we have 15 minutes where we were intending to open the floor to the group, although we've done a great job so far of addressing questions as they've arisen. So I think because it's a very small group joining us in real time, please feel free to continue unmuting to ask your questions if that's available to you. We'll open the floor.
I do have another question. If nobody else does, I've been talking a lot, so I'm happy to have somebody else talk, but I am very curious and have a lot of questions. Okay,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? I wanted to honor your original question to us, which is what are our experiences working with children in composition? And you know, I'm trained in Kodai. I'm not a Suzuki instructor, and so Kodai actually has a composition element to it for young children as well. And the notation aspect is actually very important in Kodai. So, you know, with my young children, I'm teaching them basic notation, and then when they compose, they write it out in the notation that they've learned. But I'm finding that no, they're young, so their ability to write what they hear is very limited. So, so we're starting with single lines only, not multiple lines, not multiple instruments, obviously, and also sometimes they hear things and I'm finding it way too advanced for them to put down on paper. So I'm curious about whether you have encountered that with the young children, if they have an ear that is more advanced than their ability to write. What do you do?
That's an interesting question, Angela. I think that you seem like a very sensitive teacher. So I bet you're going to notice if if a first grader doesn't really understand what to do. The thing that I can say about myself is that I'm intuitive about those children who may or may not be understanding something. So I go back and whatever was before what we're currently working on, I review that. And I can tell you about something I did on Friday, where K2 students were all mixed in one circle. And they were given a four box comp, just 4. And they did it like magic. It was awesome because they hadn't ever seen me before. And I suspect that this is not the way it always goes for us, all of us, but it does for the most part when the presentation is set up where you're not going to get in trouble, you're not going to get graded, you're not going to fail, nothing bad is going to happen to you if you don't do it quite right at first. I don't know, that might really work for me. That if you are using a bell and a drum as the 2 sounds you may use for those 4 boxes, and there's something you don't understand about that, I'm going to give you time to catch up. But that works for high school and college kids too. If there's something you don't get, I'm going to give you time to get it. And I use Kodai. I think it's extraordinary. And I think that I really hope to hear from you again about how you might use this with your teaching.
Yeah, I'd love to keep in touch, and especially
Okay.
with your manuscript coming out, I'd love to read it. So we can
Okay.
keep in touch that way. I'll put my my email in the chat.
Okay.
That's a great opening for me to interject. I've put the link to the conference proceedings that have the abstracts for all the presentations this year into the chat. I can provide it again momentarily. The proceedings do have contact information for the presenters, a full detailed schedule, and there's some more information available on our website, like a list of research publications like the ones we've been talking about today. So I'll put those in the chat, but just to let people know that those resources are available. And Pat, I interrupted you, so over to you.
No, I was just going to ask one more question, and then we can close things out. I was going to ask if you noticed when you've worked with children, if pianists tend to think in multiple lines and string players tend to think in single line.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
So everybody thinks differently, Pat.
Okay.
I don't know that it has to do with our instruments either. Because when we are using technology, music first is something I really enjoy, even more than some others. But I think it's who
Okay.
knows.
Okay, just was
Yeah.
curious.
Nothing's ever the same. Nothing, and nobody does anything the same.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Well, we've come close to the end of our time here, and unless anyone has anything else that they would like to add before we wrap things up. Okay. So I want to first of all thank Yoon and Caitlin and Lisa for their presentations tonight. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and of your projects with us, and we look forward to hearing more in the future. I will send another reminder. The link should be the same for everybody for every day. So if you can't find, find today's link, I will send another reminder out on Tuesday for Wednesday's presentations, which will include 40 years of Suzuki piano in Brazil, counter stories of 8 Chinese American string players, and music performance anxiety, adolescents, musicians, and the private music teacher. Those are the 3 presentations we'll hear on Wednesday. And Wednesday, our time is at 9 Pacific and 12 Eastern. We will try to get the, if I can get the link, the video up to YouTube, I'll send that also in the Tuesday reminder. And there's one other, some of you, I've received a number of emails apparently about giving a donation for the registration. Apparently our website for that has been hacked, or somebody tried to hack it or whatever, so the university has disabled it. When that goes back up, I'll also include that in the reminder email, so if you're so inclined or we're trying to do that, you can go back and make a donation. Kate, is there anything I'm forgetting?
No, Pat, I think that's everything. So I'll just echo Pat's sentiments and say thank you so much for those of you who took time out of a beautiful summer evening to join us for today's presentations. Please do check the detailed schedule to join us again on Wednesday for the research presentations. And Pat, I guess we should say the keynote on Friday by Dr. Karen Hendricks, who will be speaking about empathy in Suzuki. So we hope to see you back on Wednesday and Friday. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.